Welcome to ACEC Georgia's Engineering Change Podcast, your guide to the intersection of engineering, politics, and leadership, all served up with a side of Georgia charm.
Hey, y'all.
I'm Brett Hillesheim, Director of Communications, and I'm one of your guides as we explore where the nuts and bolts of engineering meet the movers and shakers of policy and leadership. But I couldn't do it by myself. I'm joined by the President and CEO of ACEC Georgia and the qualifications base to my selections, Michael Sully Sullivan.
Happy to be here. I think I'm one of the nuts of engineering.
Yeah, definitely not a bolt. You're not.
No,
I agree.
And joining us this week and every time we delve into life under the Gold Dome, Christy Turallo, Director of Government Affairs.
And I am the low bid edition.
Never.
Not true.
Never.
Not true.
Christy, Sully, welcome back to Engineering Change.
Thanks,
Happy
Brett.
to be back.
You know, the haters said we couldn't do it.
The haters did say we couldn't do it.
But here we are, episode number 2.
Haters are going to hate, but look at us now. Here we are.
So how'd you guys feel about the first episode? If you didn't hear the first episode,
Go back and listen to
pause, stop now.
Yeah.
Go back and listen to it so you can feel part of this conversation right now. And we'd love to hear your feedback on that episode. How did you guys feel about episode 1?
I got lots of really positive feedback from our members.
Yep.
People coming up and saying, "Hey, I listened to the podcast. That was really funny. Loved it."
Yeah.
Nice things. It was gratifying.
Yeah, I will say we've had several events at ACEC Georgia since then, and at every event somebody's come up and said something about it. So I think it resonated, and we're hoping to maybe repeat episode 1 charm in episode 2,
Or
with double the fun.
double the charm, maybe.
double the charm.
Yeah.
Double the charm.
Increase the charm.
Sully, any comments on that opening music for you?
Well, we do have a big fan.
Yeah,
we have my son is a big fan of our podcast because the opening and closing music is a song that he wrote and performed with his band, the Down and Outs.
So I noticed we had a lot of listens that are only 15 seconds of the beginning, and so it's just him
It
hitting
was
up.
just him. Yeah. Well, I can tell you, the Sullivan House, we were not repeating the first 15 seconds because I have heard that song. Band rehearsals are in the basement at our house.
Nice.
And so I have heard the song Intention, which I think is a great title.
Yeah, it's perfect for this
theme
podcast.
song of our podcast. But I have heard Intention, so many times.
But you're a
many
drummer. Do you ever join in on the rehearsals?
I have not joined in with the band, but we have had jam sessions with my son and my sister and my nephew. And yeah, we
Oh, wow.
a lot of musicians at the family.
Musical family.
Yeah.
You're so multifaceted. So.
I contain multitudes, Brett.
So once again this week we're going to be diving into life under the Gold Dome, but that will not be our format every episode.
No.
I think it's important to note that Sully, from the beginning we've planned for these kind of discussions, but also having newsmakers, leaders in the industry on the show.
Yeah, I think we want to have a balance. I think we want to keep our viewers, our listeners, which you can be either a viewer or a listener, or actually view and listen at the same time. We want to keep them informed about what's going on in politics that affects the engineering industry. But we also want to introduce them to newsmakers and policymakers and decision makers who either, are from our industry or who have influence or impact on our industry. And I think a good cadence is to alternate, politics this week. This time, newsmaker next time. Ping pong.
Of course, we're kind of politics heavy right now because we're in the thick
Sure.
of it.
Yeah, the General Assembly session obviously creates a different priority of news coming at us. But yeah, I think the intention is to provide both the political advocacy part of our mission and the business resources, business education part of our mission.
The intention. I see what you did there. You brought it back to the theme song.
It's the theme song. Yeah, it's the intention.
Let me cross over to Christy real quick.
Oh. All right.
Yeah, sorry about that, folks.
I have PTSD.
Christy, we're talking about being in the thick of it. Something called Crossover Day just recently happened in your neck of the woods. Tell us about that.
Yes, we are in the thick of the legislative session. That is 40 legislative days. Legislative days are not consecutive. It will take them 3 months to go through 40 days. But that is by design, of course. But crossover is a deadline. It's super important. It's one of the most important days of the session. It is the deadline for a bill that is introduced in one chamber to cross out of that or pass out of that original chamber and go to the next one. So if a House bill starts in the House, it's got to get through crossover, get passed out of the House by crossover or on crossover, which makes for a very late night, and to the Senate and vice versa. And speaking of late nights, the Senate adjourned around 9 p.m., which is actually a little early.
Oh, wow.
They went in at 10 a.m.
Wow.
Thursday and adjourned at 9 p.m. The House went in at 10 a.m. and adjourned around 11:30 p.m. So
Wow.
they were in much longer. The House passed roughly 70 bills and resolutions.
All-time record for
Wow.
crossover day.
Wow.
And the Senate considered about 50. And yeah, it was quite the day.
Yeah.
Very busy day. Lots of steps.
You say it's busy. I had no idea it was that busy. Like 70 bills.
70 bills is a lot of bills.
That's a lot of bills.
I mean, I've never seen the House like pick up such a great cadence.
Wow.
Like they were just churning through it. There weren't a lot of contentious measures. And the contentious measures that were involved on the Senate side, there was a bill that, passed on partisan lines, but there's a procedural move. And it's my favorite procedural move. It's calling the question. And the majority
Spoken
leader,
like a true lobbyist, she has a favorite procedural move.
The majority leader, Steve Gooch, in the middle of a pretty contentious debate was like, I call the question. And he ended debate that way.
Oh, wow.
And they were able to vote on the bill.
Wow.
Motion to call the question does not require a second and is not debatable. And it takes priority over everything else, so it stops debate.
And just so everybody is aware, you can't filibuster in the state of Georgia.
Okay.
But that's kind of a filibuster when you like just keep talking an issue to death and hope that maybe someone will, move to table something, which is the table is this theoretical table that exists where a issue can just be placed on it and pulled off at any time.
Put aside for a moment.
Unless, of course, it's crossover.
Or forever.
Yep.
So,
and you can't filibuster in Georgia, but you can Dave and Buster's.
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
Yes, you can. So speaking
We're looking for sponsors.
Yeah, Dave and Buster's.
Dave and Buster's.
Let's keep talking about bills for a minute. We had a bill that we were following very closely, that we were proposing, I think maybe the right term.
We wrote it, introduced it, and we're trying to shepherd it through the legislative process, yes.
And I noticed it was not listed on the bills of crossover.
Nope, it
So,
wasn't.
You want to tell us about that, Christy?
It was House Bill 1228 by Representative Tyler Paul Smith from Bremen. He is the chairman of the Judiciary Non-Civil Committee. He is an attorney, farmer, all-around great guy. We really like him. And he carried our qualifications-based selection bill. And for those of you who are not aware of what qualifications-based selection is, it's really just the process of procuring professional services, in this case, architects, engineers, and landscape architects. Sometimes that includes surveyors, land surveyors, that is. So that is the process of acquiring those professional services based on qualifications rather than price. Now, price is still a component of this, and it's a pretty strong component, and the owner of the project still gets to make a decision based on price.
Okay.
So what this really means is you have qualifications first. You say, hey, I'm looking for a design firm with the following things. In the qualities and experience and technical expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And then you rank the firms that have responded, and then you start price negotiations with the top-ranked firm.
It sounds a little bit like a person looking for a job. You submit your resume, it has your qualifications on it. If it matches the qualifications of the job, then you move to hopefully negotiating a salary.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
I mean, there are real-world examples of qualifications-based selection being just a really great way to procure employment and employees and get quality work.
Yeah. So it sounds great. Tell us more about the bill and what it proposed to do.
So QBS, qualifications-based selection, is required on the state agency level in the state of Georgia 47 states require it on the state agency level, and 22 states require it on the local government level. And we are hoping to become number 23 with House Bill 1228. So it would require local governments to utilize qualifications-based selection for their engineers and architects and landscape architects. And this is actually very helpful for them because when you make decisions based on price, bad things can happen. And you may be a local government who's like, okay, I've got all of these bids. I've got $130,000, I've got $150,000, and I've got $80,000. Well, in the grand scheme of things, $80,000 isn't that much different from $130,000. And I'm saving taxpayer dollars in preserving my budget because I'm saving money here. And then you may end up with really bad design, and that tends to happen with low bid.
Because as a local official, you're thinking, I'm saving my citizens money.
Right.
And that's your primary concern. And then you end up costing them more money, maybe through bad design.
Yep. So QBS promotes schedule adherence. It reduces change orders. And when you have a highly qualified firm that has been involved in that local jurisdiction, they can see those complexities that other firms may not.
That's something that I never really understood about the Georgia Engineering Awards, was all these descriptions of these projects completed on time or ahead of schedule. I never really realized how big of a deal that was.
And often under budget.
Yeah, and because of what you're saying. I mean, it costs local governments more money, state government more money, the longer that schedule goes on.
Yep. And a lot of local governments in the state of Georgia do utilize qualifications-based selection, but we do want to see a more consistent approach to QBS. We believe that this is better for taxpayers who are actually paying for those projects. It's better for the end consumer. It's better for the local government. And it creates a more even playing field for firms because smaller firms don't really have the economies of scale to low bid. So if you've got a large firm, they may have an overhead that they can change or massage.
Yeah, they can absorb certain costs. They could even approach a project as a loss leader in order to get in with that particular jurisdiction and develop a relationship with them. So they could actually afford to take the project as a loss. A small firm doesn't have that luxury. They don't have the ability to do that. They have tighter budgets.
Right.
So this promotes diversity of firms, and it allows a lot of small firms to actually get their foot in the door.
So it sounds like a really great thing. Sounds like something that saves ultimately taxpayers money. That there's research behind. What happened to the bill? So
we did a lot of legwork before session started because we wanted to speak to the cities, the Georgia Municipal Association, or GMA, and the counties, the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia, ACEC, and they generally have an institutional opposition to mandates.
In Georgia, the idea is that, and it's enshrined in the Georgia Constitution. It's not just something they believe in, philosophically. It's in the Constitution that local governments in Georgia have home rule, local control, and they're given some broad discretion over decisions within their jurisdictions. But it's not absolute.
Right.
There are lots and lots of rules and regulations that the General Assembly places on local governments, mandates local governments to do, ways they require local governments to do certain things. And one of those things is procurement. There's an entire code section, which is where this bill would place our QBS requirements, that says, hey, local governments, here's how you procure contractors or professional services.
Yep. So we worked with GMA and ACCG on it, and we got GMA to be neutral.
Which is huge.
That was a big lift. I went home and was just thoroughly excited about them being neutral on the measure. Because
people may not understand why you'd be so excited just to have somebody be neutral about your bill, but
when they've had this institutional position that we are going to oppose this based on the home rule precedent, that was really exciting. And to be clear, the cities and counties, they promulgate QBS as a best practice. They're just against it being
So they
a mandate.
believe in it.
Yes.
They just don't want it mandated.
Yep.
They just don't want to be told what to do by the General Assembly.
Does anybody though? I mean,
no, not really. And again, so they're not opposed to QBS. They think QBS is great. They promulgate it as a best practice. Their objection is just to the mandate. Mm-hmm. And so that's not something that's unique to QBS. That's a position they take on anything that the General Assembly tries to dictate or mandate that they do or don't do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in the case of GMA, they thought that QBS is great. They have a lot of cities that love it. And there are reasonable limits. You don't have to competitively select architects and engineers every single time. So we put some very reasonable limits. Like if a local government were to estimate the design services for a project were going to be over $75,000, then they would have to competitively select utilizing qualifications-based selection.
Or the project cost was over $1 million.
Yep. So we were not able to get the counties to that position. And we got a lot of support through out the legislative session, and the legislators that we were working with, they all believed in this. Mm-hmm. But there was some concern about smaller local governments with limited resources who may not be able to implement this as easily as larger local governments. And to be clear, we didn't hear from smaller local governments. They weren't the ones saying we wouldn't be able to do this. We were hearing from larger local governments on behalf of those.
Who were worried about the smaller.
Yes.
Okay. Sure they were.
Worried.
Sure they were.
So we are taking a page out of Tennessee's handbook. And we've decided
they're literally their handbook.
Their literal handbook. We decided that it would be better to try to create some of those resources and get some more support over the interim, rather than to just try to continue to push this provision through.
So what you're saying is you took a step back from trying to pass the bill this year.
Yeah.
Okay.
And through the interim, we're going to continue to work with the legislature to ensure their full support. And we're going to work with some entities that are similar to what Tennessee did. Tennessee created a handbook utilizing the University of Tennessee's kind of version of the Carl Vinson Institute out of UGA. And what they do is, in both cases, in both states, they provide local government resources and training, and they do a lot of procurement training. So in Tennessee, once they passed their QBS bill that mandated local governments utilize QBS, they created a handbook where they had lots of resources. They talked about why QBS, how QBS, and then they created sample documents like, okay, this is what an RFQ might look like. And then they created templates that you can plug and play.
To kind of make it really easy on any size government.
Right.
Is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. I mean, the way we do advocacy at ACEC Georgia is we believe it's our obligation and it's good practice to try to make it as easy for legislators to do the thing we're asking them to do. So in this case, to support legislation requiring QBS at the local government level. So one of the things we felt like we needed to do was to create those resources, provide those resources, and work with the cities and the counties on what those resources needed to be to make it as easy for them as possible, so that when we do come back next year to get this bill passed, we've done that. We're not promising we will do that. We have done that, and we can say that in the committees and before the legislators that are considering our legislation, make it easier for them to support what we're asking them to support.
Yep.
That's really cool. One, as you guys were talking, one kind of real world example that popped into my head of this, because a lot of this sometimes is kind of nebulous and you don't really think in specifics, but my hometown did a parking lot in their park. And shortly after it was done, an engineer commented on our community Facebook group that's like, guys, they did this wrong. They went with the lowest bid, and we're going to have to redo this parking lot in 5-10 years because they did it wrong. It's going to wash out, and it's going to end up costing us twice as much, 3 times as much. And he just wanted everybody to know that if they had taken the time to base it on qualifications and the validity of the method used, our community would have saved a lot of money over the long haul.
Yeah, it happens all the time. And we had several members, and shout out to our members like Dale Rochester and with Rochester and Associates, and Greg Teague with Croy, who came down to the Capitol and met with legislators and testified in committee. But they offered tons of those kinds of real world examples where a low bid firm came in and provided the design, and that jurisdiction found out the hard way, the really expensive way, when they had to rip things out or they had to redo construction or redo design documents. And in all of those cases, they were the ones that were called to come in and fix the problem that the low bid engineering firm had done. Really, to Christy's earlier point, these local governments aren't bad actors.
Right, they're not doing this maliciously.
They think that what they're doing saves the taxpayers money. What really stems from is a misunderstanding of the difference between design and construction. When you hire a contractor, the thing has been designed. What the materials are, what the specifications are, everything about it has been determined. The contractor is just building it.
Yeah.
But at design, you haven't decided what the thing is. You haven't decided those parameters. So low bid works for contractors because you're going to get the same thing no matter which contractor you use. With design, you get what you pay for.
Results may vary.
Results may vary, for sure.
And there's really no recourse for a local government. When they get crappy design, I mean...
The taxpayers are just stuck with it.
I mean,
that's right.
That was what you signed a contract to get.
Yeah.
And because that, what they don't understand, and the argument about small, maybe less sophisticated governments, frankly, those are the governments that really would benefit most from this mandate, because what they don't understand is the way that designer gets to that lowest bid is by cutting things out.
Yeah.
But they're never having a conversation about the scope. They're never having a conversation with the designer about what it is that the assumptions that went into their bid. It's just a number. It's just math. Yeah. And that's not the best way. It's actually a really, really bad, maybe the worst way to procure design professional services.
But we're coming back next year.
We're coming back next year. We're going to get it done. Make no mistake. We'll be working between now and, as Christy referred to, the interim between this legislative and the next legislative session to get everything lined up and to work with folks who have concerns and to try to address those concerns and put us in a position to score.
And provide these resources so that local governments...
That's right. Do everything we can to make it as easy as possible for the legislators to do what we want them to do. And to Christy's point, we have a lot of support in the legislature, and we feel very confident that we'll be able to come back next year and get it done.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, QBS wasn't the only bill. Obviously, maybe on our slate of bills, it was one of the most important bills, if not the most important bill we were following. But there is a bunch of other bills we have been following.
So many other bills.
Sully, you want to tell us a little bit about, let's start with HB 617.
Sure. So HB 617 was a bill that was actually introduced in last year's legislative session by Representative Rick Jaspers, who's the chairman of the House Transportation Committee, a very powerful member of the House. And I should mention, it was introduced last year, didn't get it passed. See, sometimes things don't get passed in the first try. But ultimately, he did get it passed out of the House on crossover day. And all it seeks to do is to create a framework for the future of freight and logistics infrastructure funding and planning. So it puts certain responsibilities on the Director of Planning, the Georgia Department of Transportation Director of Planning, Janine Miller, not on her individually, but on her whoever's in her role, to come up with a plan and identify specific projects. And then it also creates a freight and logistics fund that revenue could be either dedicated to, like the motor fuel tax is dedicated to the Department of Transportation for roads and bridges. You could dedicate revenue to this freight and logistics fund, or you could appropriate it like we did this year, where the General Assembly appropriated, just a reminder for you, those of you maybe didn't watch the last episode, $1.5 billion to transportation funding in this fiscal year.
So HB 617 doesn't itself create funding.
It doesn't create any sources of funding. It just it creates a framework for how future funding could be dealt with, and it also is sort of the General Assembly putting a marker down, saying, okay, we're not creating funding now, but we intend to, and that's why we're passing this piece of legislation, because we want to put the conditions in place that will facilitate that future funding when we do come around to doing that. But it passed the House, and it's now in the hands of the Senate, and hopefully the Senate will pass it and send it to the governor.
Unanimously passed the House.
Passed the House. It's hard to do better than unanimously.
Yep. And if you want a snippet of why this is so important, you should definitely listen to our first episode where we talk a lot about transportation infrastructure funding.
And the billions and billions of dollars.
$80 billion needed for just freight and logistics related infrastructure funding between now and the year 2050. It's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Speaking of bills and transportation, though, HB 1358 didn't.
It didn't
crossover.
Pass. Yeah, HB 1358 was a pretty big bill that would have a 35-page bill, but it was a big bill that would have taken the Georgia Regional Transportation Authority, which is we call GRETA, and the ATL, which is the Atlanta Region Transit Authority, and essentially eliminate those agencies and combine all of their authorities, all of their obligations, all of their employees, all of their assets, everything about those two agencies, powers and obligations, would just be transferred into the State Road and Tollway Authority, SRTA. This is, on its face, it sounds like a lot. It is. You're eliminating two state agencies. But as a practical matter, that's kind of sort of already happened a little bit.
Yeah.
For example, GRETA and the ATL don't actually have any employees. All of their employees are employees of SRTA. GRETA and SRTA and the ATL all have the same executive director. Technically, they're the executive director of all three of those things, but it's one person. It's Janine Miller, who's also the director of planning. She's got 4 jobs. Her predecessor, Chris Tomlinson, was the executive director of all three of those agencies. So the fact of the matter is they've already been acting.
Yeah, they're already functioning as one. More
in a collaborative sort of single agency way. So this bill would just seek to make that the law and to take all those authorities and powers and put them all in one state agency. But it was introduced late. It was introduced basically a week before crossover day, and it's a big bill and a big impact. So while the intent was positive, the intent was to save money. There's a lot of excess expense in having 3 agencies exist when you could just have one agency exist. And there's a lot of inefficiency in having 3 agencies when you could just have one agency. So the intent behind it was good, but because it was such a big impact and such a late introduction, a lot of legislators who are not directly involved in transportation issues just really didn't have time to sort of process it, get their arms around it, and kind of understand what it did and why it did it and who wanted that to happen.
That makes sense.
Ultimately, it didn't make it across.
That makes sense.
Of course, everything that dies on crossover does not necessarily stay dead. And so this bill, I don't think it's going to come back to life in this legislative session, but I do think we will probably see something like this, either identical legislation or slightly tweaked legislation in next year's legislative session.
Very cool. Very cool. And so to be clear, it's really not changing a whole lot, just in formalities, and it saves money ultimately.
I mean, as a legal matter, it does eliminate 2 state agencies. But as a practical matter, that really doesn't change much because you're not eliminating their authorities. You're not eliminating their employees. You're not eliminating their powers or responsibilities or obligations. You're just cutting and pasting them from 2 agencies into one agency. Now, one thing it does do that is a change, the ATL, which is the Atlanta Region Transit Authority, their authority, just like GRETA's, is regional. It's a specifically defined geographic region set of counties. By taking those authorities and powers and putting them in SRTA, which is a statewide authority, you're actually expanding those authorities to the whole state. So that's actually a positive because it creates opportunities for transit under the banner of SRTA and the authority of SRTA that wouldn't be possible under the ATL because of its geographic restrictions. So, for example, if you had a $6 billion automobile manufacturing facility being located just outside of Savannah,
just as an example,
just spitballing here, you might want to create some transit opportunities to get workers back and forth from Savannah to the plant. That wouldn't have been possible under the ATL because the ATL doesn't have Savannah within its jurisdiction. It will if you transfer that jurisdiction to SRTA.
So it saves money. And it could cause innovation in transportation throughout the state. So hopefully we do see this picked back up next session.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel confident we'll see it next session, and probably will fare much better next year.
Good.
Yeah.
Christy, one of the other bills we were following was HB 1371.
Yes. House Bill 1371 was by the majority whip of the House, James Burchett. And it dealt with premises liability. It was a tort reform bill. So call back to our first episode when we talked about
another reason to go back
reform.
and listen to episode 1 if you haven't.
So premises liability, in layman's terms, is really just your responsibility as a landowner if something happens on your property. So it would clarify the cause of action, which is just really your ability to sue someone.
Okay.
To commit to individuals if you go onto a property with the intent to commit a felony. If I'm a criminal and I'm like, I'm going to stab that guy, Brett, in the Publix
regularly.
parking lot, you can prove that it was my intent to try to harm you. Then that limits the ability for you to bring in the landowner.
Yeah, landowners are not liable in a situation where the individual comes on their property with the intent to commit a felony.
Because in theory, they have little control over this.
Yes,
that's right. That's right.
The second provision of the bill restricts the foreseeability presumption if the property is in a known high crime area, and which that really means is you can't say that the landowner should have known that something would happen on their property. So it does restrict that, and it did pass the House unanimously.
It did. It's not as far as other bills have gone, and maybe not as far as the business community would have liked, but it is a very definite step in the right direction relative to premises liability, and one that we celebrate and look forward to hoping to see pass the Senate in exactly the same form, and maybe go to the governor. And
to be clear, this doesn't just affect business owners. This affects you as a landowner as well.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
So if you are just, you have a house and someone gets hurt on your property and they weren't there with your permission, this clarifies what your rights are and what you could be legally held responsible for.
So I got to tell all my kids they don't have the right to be on my property. Therefore, I'm not responsible if they get hurt on my property. Is that how that works?
I have some problem with that. I think that's in a different code section.
I think it might be.
Yeah. It's in the DFAX
section,
I think.
Never mind. Scratch that.
How many kids do you have, Brett?
Too many. 6 + 1. Let the engineers figure that out. Speaking of things that take a lot of money, other than my kids.
A lot of money.
There was something interesting added to the budget that was passed.
Indeed, there was. There is an RFQ that's out on the street now. That RFQ was introduced literally on the day that the governor signed the current year's amended fiscal year budget. They couldn't have issued it before because the money hadn't been appropriated yet.
I think it's so mean that they put these brand new RFQs just out on the street.
They do.
Well, you wouldn't think
on leap year.
You wouldn't think it was mean if you were the person who was gonna the firm that was gonna win one of these contracts. Yeah. So the RFQ is RFQ JustFIC 101, and it is for massive renovations, improvements, and new construction around the Capitol complex. State Capitol was built in 1887. And a lot of things have changed in Georgia since then. So
no more horses.
No more horses. Well, we have horses. They just don't live underneath. They're not getting parked underneath the first floor of the Capitol anymore. So this does a few big things, and we're talking about an almost $400 million appropriation. It would call for the construction of a multi-story, probably an 8-story new legislative office building, which would contain offices for almost every member of the Georgia General Assembly and their staffs. It would be directly across the street from the Capitol, adjacent to the existing Department of Agriculture building. And it would, again, have offices for everybody, meeting space, committee meeting rooms, lots of things that the Capitol very desperately needs and doesn't have right now. It would also have a 500 space parking deck for legislators and staff. Needed. Very much needed. And we know, like it's hard to find parking at the Capitol, and the parking that is there is relatively far away. So it would do those two things. And then it would renovate the Capitol. Once you have that new office building built, the idea would be that you would then begin to move legislators out of the Capitol who are currently in the Capitol. And, right now you've got legislators that have offices in the Capitol, Some of those offices are lovely and grand and have windows and wood paneling. Some of those offices are basically rabbit warrens.
Look like they're still the stables.
Actually, some of them do. Yeah, look like the stables, and there's a whole like stable joke we could keep running here, but we won't. We won't. And then some legislators have offices in the Coverdale Legislative Office Building, which is an existing office building across the street from the Capitol. But that building was not designed for offices. It was designed as a state agency building. It was converted into a legislative office building. But if you've been in there, particularly in any of the committee rooms, so bad. These committee rooms have these huge, like 4-foot diameter columns that essentially, no matter where you sit, it's
right in your way.
You can't see the entire committee, and more importantly, the committee members can't see the entire audience. And so you've got this weird sort of hodgepodge of office sizes and office spaces and office locations. There is actual carpet on the wall in the Coverdale Legislative Office Building. The idea will be, let's fix all that. Let's build a nice new office building that's commensurate with the status of Georgia as the 8th largest state and the economic capital of the South. And then let's renovate the Capitol to kind of bring it back to its historic state. Get rid of some of the bad decisions, architectural design decisions that have been made to try to create more space in a building that just wasn't designed for all those people and all those things, and ultimately make it more accessible for the public. Right now, again, building in 1871, it's very parts of the Capitol, certain offices and committee meeting rooms in the Capitol are very difficult, if not impossible, for someone with mobility issues to access. And that could be the public. It could also be members of the General Assembly who have those mobility issues. And so part of the intent is to make it more accessible, make it more beautiful, make it more historically accurate, and a better people's house for the people of Georgia and the legislators who work there.
More bathrooms that are supposed to be accessible. Wow. I mean, they've like explicitly put in the RFQ, we need more accessible bathrooms.
I've worked at the Capitol off and on as a lobbyist since like 1997. Depending on which floor I'm in, I still have to think, is there a men's room on this floor? Because there's not on every floor.
There's not,
and they're not in the same place. And you cannot, it's obviously built in 1887.
Yeah.
They didn't have any bathrooms in 1887. And, so it's definitely long overdue and something that we're really excited about and excited to hopefully have some of our members working on this amazing once in a lifetime project.
Yeah.
And there is a way to get between the new legislative office building.
That's right. I left it out. Well, there's 3 options. The RFQ calls for 3 options. One option would be a covered, connected bridge from the 3rd floor of the Capitol to the new legislative office building.
And which cardinal direction would that be facing?
That would be north.
Okay.
That would be from the north side of the Capitol to the south side of the legislative office building. Brett's making fun of my innate sense of direction.
It's like a freaking superpower, man.
It's like a walking campus.
So, I'm always pointed in the right direction, people. So that would be, a covered bridge, enclosed, air-conditioned covered bridge. That's option 1. Option 2 is an underground tunnel.
Team tunnel.
Yeah, we're all team tunnel. I'd like to see the tunnel. I think the tunnel would also aesthetically, not take away from the campus, but also would be underground and would give you access from the Capitol to the legislative office.
Like the U.S. Capitol.
And legislators could basically pretend they're Batman.
They could.
Ooh.
They could. To the Batcave. They just need the Batman pole to slide down to get to the tunnel.
Add it to the RFQ, folks.
And then the third option, which I don't think anybody is on, is Team Crosswalk. It would just be a crosswalk across Martin Luther King Boulevard from the Capitol to the legislative office building. I think that's not likely to be the solution.
When I look at Atlanta, I don't think, you know what we need? One more crosswalk.
Yeah. It's definitely, I think, well, I don't know. I would be very surprised if that's where they land. I would assume that they were probably going to do, because there's advantages to it. The covered crosswalk would come into the 3rd floor, which is the floor that the legislative chambers are on, the floor of the legislative chambers. So it'd be very easy access for legislators to get from their House or Senate floor to their office in the legislative
New legislators wouldn't get lost.
They probably wouldn't get lost. The tunnel would be a little bit, not as convenient, but both of them would have the huge plus for everybody who comes to the Capitol and is visiting the Capitol, whether it's a legislator or a lobbyist or just the general public, is that you only have to go through security once, whether you come into the legislative office building or you go through the Capitol. Once you're in there, you wouldn't have to go through security again. With the crosswalk, you'd have to go through security both times. So yeah, we're definitely Team Tunnel. And very excited about this project again. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity, and we're again very hopeful. The RFQ responses are due on March 15th, which is next week. It's a very aggressive timetable for responses.
To be clear, we're recording on March 6th.
Yeah, and the RFQ was just issued last Thursday.
29th.
Wow.
So very aggressive timetable because the construction timetable is very aggressive.
Right.
The goal or the project deadline is for the new construction, the new legislative office building and parking deck to be completed before to December 2026, in time for the 2027 legislative session. And then once that happens, they can move everybody out of the Capitol and do the renovations to the Capitol, which would be completed the following December 2027. So very aggressive timeline, but a really cool project and
really cool.
Hoping to bring listeners and viewers more information about that in the near future.
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of completes our rundown of some of the major bills we were following.
Yeah.
A lot of interesting stuff happening at the Capitol, and I know that I've gotten an education just in these first two episodes of the podcast. But what's kind of going on the rest of the session? Because there's still more session left.
Yeah. So tomorrow is Legislative Day 31. So last Thursday, crossover was Legislative Day 28. There tends to be a little bit of a lull in activity just because they had such a late day on crossover. And they're assessing some of the bills that didn't cross over. If you don't pass during crossover or before crossover, your bill's technically dead for the session. Now, the language may not be dead. The language may come back to life in the form of another bill that has to be what we call germane, and that is based on the ruling of the chair. So if you have a transportation bill and you're like, we need to change the way that you pass a postal service vehicle, and that bill didn't pass the crossover deadline, but there's another transportation bill that might deal with funeral processions. You could potentially put that language on the side.
Add it on.
Yep.
Nice.
Yep.
So you could either add it on, or you could completely delete the language that was originally in the bill, replace it solely with the language from the other bill.
Does that happen often?
Yes.
It happens all the time. Yes,
it does.
Atlanta is the site of The Walking Dead on TV. Yep. And we definitely have zombie legislation that comes to life down at the Capitol. Yep. For sure.
And then it turns into a Frankenstein because there are so many different things that are kind of related, but as long as it's in the same code section. So if you're looking at a licensing bill, as long as it's Title 43, you can probably get away with it unless the chair is like, no, actually, that's not germane.
And sometimes those vehicles, if it's a popular code section, something that a lot of legislation out there that didn't pass was related to, you may have a Christmas tree, which is you're hanging the ornaments, the dead bills, you're hanging the ornaments on the Christmas tree. And then what you're left with that Christmas tree is a Frankenstein bill. A lot of things happen at the end, and it's where you really have to be paying attention. And the Georgia's engineering industry is so lucky to have Christy down there at the Capitol, making sure that we're paying attention to things that are happening because they happen fast, and they don't usually stand up in the well and say, "Hey, here's what we're doing." Yep. A lot of times it's not a lot of notice, and not a lot of people know about it until after it's happened.
Yep, we got to pay attention. This is a stressful time, but it's also one of the most important times and one of my favorite times.
I do want to say, like, we talked about, like, you have to really be able to dig into these bills to see what they say, but you, podcast listener, don't have to.
You don't.
Can let Christy Tirallo do that for you. She sends out an update every week called the Capitol Updates. So if you're an ACEC Georgia member, you can get that, and you can read her synopsises of the bills while we're following, which ones we're supporting, which ones we're not. And really, you do all the work for them.
And if they're really interested in getting directly engaged in our government advocacy process, they should sign up to be a member of our Government Affairs Council, which any ACEC Georgia member can do. And they can participate in our biweekly during the legislative session and monthly during the off-session Government Affairs Committee Zoom meetings, where they can tell us, we can tell them what's going on, we can tell them what we're working on, and they can tell us what we might want to think about working on, and they can ask questions about things that maybe we didn't cover. It's a great opportunity for them to very directly get involved in not only hearing about what's going on, but having a voice in telling us what we ought to be working on.
Well, fantastic. And again, you can get involved in all this on our Government Affairs Council if you're a ACEC Georgia member. You just log into your member portal and select it. It's really easy. This is a great time to remind you that Engineering Change is a production of ACEC Georgia.
And we're happy to do it, and keep those cards and letters coming, folks. Let us know what we're doing well, what we're maybe not doing well, or things you'd like to hear about. As we mentioned earlier, we're going to have newsmakers, interviews with newsmakers. Let us know who you want to hear from. Let us know who you'd like for us to talk to. Again, give us the feedback. We work for you. Every day we're getting up and working for Georgia's engineering industry, and it's just one of the ways we do that. And we'd love to hear from you about how we could make it the best thing that it can possibly be. Slam that subscribe button. What do the kids say?
Smash
Hammer
it.
it.
Smash that subscribe button, and hopefully continue to watch this and future episodes of the Engineering Change podcast.
And if you liked this episode, or even if you just found it tolerable, like us on whatever podcast platform you subscribe to, a comment, subscribe, it all helps us.
And if you're a hater, we don't
No room for haters.
We don't want to hear from you.
Actually, I'm okay if you still like and subscribe.
Oh, sure. That's fine. Yeah, absolutely.
For Engineering Change, I'm Brett.
I'm Sully.
I'm Christy.
We'll see you next time.
Intro and closing music. Intention by the Down and Outs. Music used with permission. Engineering Change is a production of ACEC Georgia. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved.